Well, I want to thank everybody for coming to this important hearing on the Born Alive Act. I will formally gavel us in and thank Ann Wagner for her leadership in bringing the Born Alive Act to Congress. All of my colleagues that are here today are people who have not only been passionate in the fight for life, but also have become co-sponsors of the bill, but now refuse to bring the bill to the floor.
My good friend, oh, sorry. I can usually be heard, right, as I said earlier, but I want to thank my dear friend Whip Scalise, Congressman Smith, and everyone in the pro-life caucus for joining us, and as we've organized the first minority hearing of the 116th Congress, and it has been quite a lift. I would especially like to thank our esteemed witnesses for being here this afternoon. Thank you so very much for what you've been doing and for your testimony and your life of testimony that you're going to present today. Protecting Americans' children, both before and after they are born, is near and dear to all of our hearts. This is an incredibly urgent moment for our nation. Over the course of 2019, radical legislators, and we've heard it from the whip, from New York to Illinois to Virginia, have moved to strip protections for babies who survive abortions. I am shocked that there are even prominent American politicians who want to deny babies life-saving medical care, and that's what we're talking about here in H.R. 962. As a mother, as a grandmother, a legislator, and an advocate, I am grieved to find that we must defend something that I never thought Americans would have to fight for: life-saving care for babies that are born alive. But Congress has an opportunity to act. Along with so many of my colleagues, I introduced H.R. 962, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. And we are thankful that a number of Democrats have boldly joined us in our efforts to bring this legislation to the floor against the wishes of their leadership. And we need more. Let me remind everyone, recent polling finds that over 70% of Americans who identify as Democrats support this legislation, but their representatives ignore their voices. I've had the opportunity to raise awareness on this heartbreaking crisis in my own district. Earlier this year, Melissa Oden joined me in St. Louis at an event on the Born Alive Act. And Melissa is a brave and extraordinary woman from Missouri who survived an abortion after being left to die in a bucket of formaldehyde in a utility closet. Melissa is alive today because of the courage of nurses who chose to act responsibly as she was gasping for breath after being left to die. My heart breaks for the many babies who did not share Melissa's miracle and were intentionally left to die. Congress has an opportunity to ensure that no baby is denied life-saving care simply because he or she is unwanted. Denying medical care to America's infants is a violation of our Constitution and an egregious offense against basic human dignity. Signing the Born Alive Act petition is the simplest choice that any member of Congress can make. The tragedy of infanticide across our country requires serious and effective legal safeguards. I want to thank you all for being here on behalf of those who are voiceless, those who cannot protect themselves, the most vulnerable in our society. And I thank our whip for organizing and chairing this hearing. I yield back.
Thank you, Ann, for that powerful testimony and for your strong leadership to bring this issue to the forefront and ultimately to bring this bill to the forefront so we can get that legal protection that's so necessary. Now, somebody who's dedicated his entire life in Congress to fighting for those who can't fight for themselves, and especially in his defense of the unborn, and that is the chair of the Pro-Life Caucus, Chris Smith from New Jersey.
I want to thank our distinguished whip, Steve Scalise, for his leadership, Kevin McCarthy, and of course Ann Wagner, who's taken this tremendous leadership and leading all of us in this effort to try to enact this important legislation. I would say to my colleagues and to all here, we all know this, but it bears repeating. In a Florida abortion clinic, Gloria Williams delivered a live baby at 23 weeks gestation. The clinic owner took the baby, who was gasping for air, cut her umbilical cord, threw her into a biohazard bag, and put the bag in the trash. Heartbroken, Gloria later had a funeral for her baby girl, who she named Shanice. In Gloria's home state of Florida, in just 1 year, 2017, 11 babies were born alive during abortions. Shockingly, only 6 states, Florida, Arizona, Michigan, Minnesota, Oklahoma, and Texas, currently require the reporting of children born alive who survive abortion. Why the cover-up? Dr. Willard Cates, the former head of the CDC Abortion Surveillance Unit, said it years ago. Live births are little known, this is his quote, because organized medicine, from fear of public clamor and legal action, treats them more as an embarrassment to be hushed up than a problem to be solved. It's like turning yourself into the IRS, he went on, for an audit. What is there to gain? The tendency is not to report because there are only negative incentives. Philadelphia abortionist Kermit Gosnell, one of the few who got caught, was convicted of murder for killing children who were born alive after attempted abortions. The grand jury described it this way. Gosnell had a simple solution for the unwanted babies he delivered. He killed them. He didn't call it that. He called it ensuring fetal demise. The way he ensured fetal demise was by sticking scissors into the back of that baby's head and cutting their spinal cord. He called that, quote, snipping. The Gosnell jury went on to say, grand jury, Gosnell, we are convinced, committed hundreds of acts of infanticide. He got away with them for decades because they all took place inside his clinic. We are disappointed that we can charge him only for the babies he let die in the past 2 years because of a statute of limitations on homicide in that state. Let me conclude. Two bioethicists, Dr. Alberto Gilabini and Francesca Minerva, published an outrageous paper in the Journal of Medical Ethics justifying the deliberate, premeditated murder of newborn babies during the first hours, days, and even weeks after birth. And they said, and I quote, when circumstances occur after birth that would have justified abortion, what we call after-birth abortion, we're calling infanticide as well, should be permissible. They said it's because the child doesn't have aims, can't dream, can't articulate a vision. Therefore, they are denied personhood and denied any legal protections. Finally, the Born Alive Survivors Protection Act seeks to end or at least mitigate this egregious child abuse, requiring a standard of care to the same degree as professional skill, care, and diligence to preserve a child at that same gestational age. It also provides civil and criminal penalties and makes clear that no woman can ever be prosecuted. We are focusing on the abortionist. Yield back.
Appreciate that testimony as well, Chris, and your longtime leadership on this role. I do have some of the statements from other leaders that couldn't be here but wanted their statements to be entered into the record. So without objection, I move that the Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy, statements, as well as our conference chair, Liz Cheney, and the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, Doug Collins, that all of their statements will be entered into the record. Without objection, so ordered. Now I will turn it over to Ann Wagner to chair the remainder of this committee, and again, thank all of our witnesses, especially thank my colleagues who are all here to express and show their support, who have signed on not only to the bill, but again, on the discharge petition, so we can get that 218 magical number to bring the bill to the floor. With that, our champion on this, Ann Wagner.
Thank you. Today we have a panel of witnesses who, as medical experts and through prior close experience with the abortion industry, can, I think, educate us all on the need to protect vulnerable infants who survive abortions. After I introduce all of the witnesses, each witness will have an opportunity to give an opening statement, after which members will be given an opportunity to question our witnesses. Dr. Robin Perucci. She is a clinical neonatologist and medical director of a 50-bed neonatal intensive care unit. She completed her residency in pediatrics as well as her fellowship in neonatology at the Children's Hospital of Wisconsin. Medical College of Wisconsin. Dr. Perucci remains active in perinatal palliative care as well as leading ongoing research and care of infants with neonatal abstinence syndrome. She has authored multiple publications and spoken around the country on perinatal and ethical issues. She also recently became an associate scholar with the Charlotte Lozier Institute, and she is a proud mom. Dr. Kathy Altman, there you are, is a board-certified OBGYN and a fellow of the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. Dr. Altman performed first trimester suction D&C abortions and received special training in second trimester D&E. She served as a medical director for Planned Parenthood of Jacksonville, Florida from 1981 to 1983. Her experiences doing abortions led her to her pro-life position, and she subsequently testified before state and congressional bodies in state courts and assisted state attorneys and Justice Department in defending the partial birth abortion ban. She has participated in Clay County's We Care program, the Free Healing Hands Clinic in Jacksonville, and Mercy Ship's Mission. Dr. Altman has received many accolades, and she is a mother of two and soon to be a new grandmama, I hear. Jill Stanek, where are you? Was a registered nurse in the labor and delivery department at Christ Hospital in Oak Lawn, Illinois, where she discovered that babies were being aborted alive to die, aborted alive to die without medical care. When hospital leaders said that they would not stop, Jill went public and has become a national figure in the effort to protect both born and preborn infants. Jill remained at the hospital fighting from the inside until she was terminated in 2001 for her public outspokenness. She's my kind of woman. Jill has testified 10 times before congressional committees and state legislatures. She is a mother of 3 and a grandmother to 12 grandsons, with 2 more, I believe, I hear on the way. Thank you. Ms. Tessa Longbuns. She's a research associate with the Charlotte Lozier Institute Data Analytics Department. Tessa's research tracks U.S. abortion trends and the characteristics of abortions and abortion providers in the United States. She recently co-authored peer-reviewed research on abortion providers' use of hospital admitting privileges and has analyzed abortion statistics from 41 states and New York City. Each witness will now have an opportunity to give brief opening remarks. Your full opening statement will be made part of the record for this hearing and will be made available online. Once we conclude our witness testimony, members will have an opportunity to ask questions. Dr. Perucci, I now recognize you for 5 minutes.
Dear members of the House of Representatives, as a neonatologist with a background in medical ethics, I wish to present the medical standard of care every baby who is born alive is supposed to receive. This standard of care is equally applicable to babies who are born prematurely as it is to those at term. The medical standard of care is sufficiently wise to include an intrinsic understanding that not every baby can be rescued, yet that never negates our obligation to care for these most vulnerable little ones. It is a fallacy to equate the degree of wantedness with the degree of the baby's humanness. The baby, at every stage of development, is never anything other than a human being, complete with his or her own unique DNA blueprint, the guide to an entire lifetime of maturation. Whether planned or not, whether desired or not, whether perfectly formed or not, the first diagnosis of every single person ever is, it's a baby. And no additional diagnoses or problems can ever change this, which is exactly why every baby who is born alive at any gestational age should ethically receive the same medical standard of care. As a way to better explain why, regardless of a baby's birth circumstances, they should all receive the same standard, there's a series of responses to relevant questions. Number one, what is the medical standard of care for tending to all newborns? At birth, all babies should be evaluated and receive the necessary degree of intervention that is outlined by the Neonatal Resuscitation Program, NRP. The guideline is based on evidence compiled by the Academy of Pediatrics and the American Heart Association. This program was devised to help the medical personnel, quote, learn the cognitive, technical, and teamwork skills needed to resuscitate and stabilize newborns. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the medical standard of care all newborn infants are to receive. This is the medical standard of care staff are expected to provide. Is NRP applicable to premature babies? Absolutely. The current edge of viability is approximately 22 weeks, and while there is certainly no guarantee we will be successful, our overall ability to resuscitate these young lives continues to improve. Have I always held this view? No. My view was informed and changed by the medical, scientific reality of caring for premature babies for over 20 years. The medical truth has been a huge part of what changed my mind from being pro-abortion to finding it ethically problematic. Neither I nor the NICU team can always fix or heal the newborn little ones that we get to care for. But there is no such thing as a human being who is literally worth less than another. Even if there is a decision to not resuscitate due to severe prematurity or congenital abnormality, this is neither equivalent to do not care or an excuse to abandon either the baby or the mother. Care is the minimum I owe to both of them. Whether the baby is born prematurely or term, the people I meet are always worthy of this, without exception. In summary, being born alive qualifies all human babies to receive the same standard of medical care. I offer this testimony not as a way to degrade those whose hearts and minds have not yet learned what I have had the privilege to witness. I do offer this testimony in the hope that by consistently saving babies, we will simultaneously better care for their mothers, which will extend to an entire family tree of affected little ones. I have learned that babies save us if we will have the courage to consistently save them.
You're yielding back? Wonderful.
Yes.
Everyone, take this example and yield back time, all right? I'd now like to recognize Dr. Altman for 5 minutes.
Republican Whip Scalise, Congressman Wagner, Congressman Smith, and members of Congress, thank you for allowing me to testify today on this critical issue.
Please speak up, Dr. Altman, if you
turn your
can.
mic,
Is your mic on? Yeah, or move it closer to you, maybe. That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay? Okay. Some say this law isn't necessary because late-term abortions are so rare, but according to the CDC, 1.3% of over 600,000 abortions performed in 2015 after 20 weeks equates to over 8,000 late-term abortions done. They say that late-term abortions are done only in the most difficult and tragic circumstances where mother's health is threatened or she's carrying a baby with severe fetal anomalies. Julie Wilkinson, an RN who assisted Dr. Warren Hearn for years with late-term abortions through 26 weeks, recently confided to me that the vast majority of the abortions he performed were done for convenience, not for fetal anomalies or maternal health problems. They say this bill isn't necessary because babies don't survive abortions, yet we have living, breathing reminders that they do in Melissa Oden, a saline abortion survivor, Hope Hoffman, a DNC with suction abortion survivor, Nick Hoot, a dismemberment abortion survivor, my cousin, a late-term induction abortion survivor, a Canadian man who survived a partial birth abortion, and many more. The Abortion Survivors Network has been in contact with over 300 abortion survivors. They lived only because someone other than their mother and the abortionist intervened. Should we really leave what they call a very personal and private decision as to whether the baby lives or dies up to the patient and her doctor because they know what is best when these are the very people who just tried to kill the baby? They say this can't happen today with modern abortion techniques because the baby dies during the abortion. In a retrospective study in 2018, researchers reported a fetal survival rate of 50% when a feticide was not used in terminations between 20 to 24 weeks. A woman who came to me for complications after her induction abortion at 20+ weeks told me that when the appropriate time came, she was told to sit on the toilet and push. She delivered a completely normal baby boy into the toilet where he drowned. Babies can even survive dismemberment abortions. If the cervix is overdilated, and I think this was mentioned in the Planned Parenthood documentary, the baby can be spontaneously expelled prior to the start of the abortion, as in the case of the Florida woman, Socorro Williams, who delivered a live baby after the laminaria insertion before the doctor could do her procedure. Also, if the cervix is overdilated and the abortionist grasps and pulls on a portion of the body intending to dismember it, the whole baby can be delivered. This is the arguments my opponents gave when I was testifying on the partial birth abortion ban 20 years ago. They claimed that a doctor intending to do a legal D&E might accidentally deliver the baby intact and then be prosecuted under the ban. This may be how the young man from Canada survived a partial birth abortion. Some argue that this doesn't happen today because doctors can cause fetal demise prior to the abortion. This only works, however, if the doctor chooses to use it, injects the medication correctly, and waits long enough for the baby to die. If not, the baby can be born alive, as in the case of Sophia Khan's baby. They say doctors and medical staff don't really kill babies who survive abortion or leave them to die by withholding medical care, despite all the testimony of multiple witnesses. We are told that this law isn't necessary because the law already protects the baby once it is born, as proven by the fact that Dr. Gosnell was convicted of killing 3 babies born alive after an abortion. But the 2002 Federal Born Alive Infant Survivors Protection Act does not prevent a physician from passively allowing an infant to die. H. 962 does not restrict abortion. It protects babies like Melissa who survive an abortion from being discriminated against and passively let to die simply because they are not wanted and were supposed to die from abortion. This bill gives medical personnel, law enforcement, and courts clear guidance as to what must be done if a baby is born alive after an abortion. Please do everything in your power to ensure that this bill is passed to protect these feisty, innocent survivors. Thank you.
Thank
I
you,
yield.
Dr. Altman, and we will. I'd now like to recognize Ms. Stanek for 5 minutes to give your oral testimony.
I'd like to thank you all for your overwhelming advocacy for the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. Just so appreciate each and every one of you. When I heard Virginia Governor Ralph Northam, who's a pediatric neurologist, describe during an interview the process by which doctors determine to shelve unwanted abortion survivors, it hit painfully close to home to me. About third trimester abortions, he said, and I'm quoting, "If a mother's in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired." Governor Northam was right. This is exactly what happens. I know because I cared for a dying baby on the other side of that decision. My experience was 20 years ago, but as Governor Northam made clear, this is still happening today. I was a registered nurse at Christ Hospital in Oak Lawn, Illinois, when I learned that it committed abortions into the second and third trimester. The procedure, called induced labor abortion, sometimes resulted in babies being aborted alive, and if they were aborted alive, they were allowed to die without any medical care or intervention whatsoever. They were given what was called comfort care, made comfortable, as Governor Northam indicated. One night, a nursing coworker was taking a little abortion survivor to the soiled utility room to die. And when she told me what she was doing, I couldn't bear the thought of this suffering child dying alone. He'd been aborted because he had Down syndrome, and he was between 21 and 22 weeks old, about the size of my hand. And he didn't move very much because he was using all of his energy attempting to breathe. And I remember toward the end of his life, I couldn't tell if he was alive or not unless I held him up against the light to see if I could see his heart beating through his chest wall because their skin is so thin at that age. And after he was pronounced dead, I folded his little arms across his chest. I tied them together with a little string. I wrapped him in a shroud, and I took him to the morgue where we took all of our dead patients. That word comfortable, which Governor Northam used, is particularly grating to me. How far will doctors go to comfort themselves for letting abortion survivors die? Well, after I went public about survivors being taken to the soiled utility room, Christ Hospital created what it called the comfort room. This was a small, nicely decorated room, complete with a first photo machine in case parents wanted professional pictures taken of their aborted babies, baptismal supplies in case they wanted their aborted babies baptized, and a foot printer and baby bracelets in case they wanted keepsakes of their aborted baby. And you may not think that what I'm telling you can possibly be true, but I took pictures of that comfort room, and I have submitted them today with my testimony. Clearly, little abortion survivors desperately need you to pass the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act to provide them with legal medical protections and not leave open the door whether they live or die. It is hard for me to imagine that any legislator would be comfortable with infanticide. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Stanek. I now recognize Ms. Longbones for 5 minutes for her oral testimony.
Republican Whip Scalise, Congresswoman Wagner, Congressman Smith, and members of Congress, thank you for having me here today. Today, I will discuss the national and state statistics that can shed light on this important issue. The Born Alive Infants Protection Act of 2002 defined a baby who survives an abortion as a legal person, but it did not extend any additional protections. The Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act would fill in those gaps by requiring the abortion provider to provide the same care to a baby born alive during an abortion that would be provided to any other child born at the same gestational age. The act would also create penalties for abortion providers who fail to comply and give women who undergo abortions the right to sue for civil penalties. Despite claims to the contrary, both national and state data show that infants do in fact survive abortions. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, reviewed infant death records from 2003 through 2014 that had been coded as a death resulting from an induced abortion or spontaneous miscarriage. The CDC examined each death certificate to identify deaths that resulted from babies being born alive during induced abortions and then dying. The CDC found 143 such deaths over the 12-year period, and the CDC acknowledges that this may be an underestimate. In fact, state-level data suggests that these estimated 143 babies may be a considerable undercount. 7 states have provided CLI with information on infants who survive abortions: Arizona, Florida, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Oklahoma, and Texas. Although the states have reported for varying time frames, these 7 states alone have together reported at least 160 abortion survivors. While we do not know how many babies survive abortions in the other 43 states, it is likely that the true total is significantly higher. Montana is one example. Currently, in Montana, it is considered homicide if a person causes the death of an infant who survives an abortion. Similar to current federal law, infants' lives are legally protected, but there are no requirements for active steps that medical professionals must take to keep babies alive. By law, Montana requires abortion providers to report whether the infant showed any signs of life after the abortion. However, because of the lack of enforcement, the Montana Health Department considers the data to be unreliable and does not track or record this data in Montana's abortion data system. To address some of these issues, the Montana legislature passed the Montana Born Alive Infant Protection Act earlier this year. The act would have required doctors to provide medical care for babies who are born alive and created penalties if the law were violated, just as the federal act seeks to do. The Montana Act was vetoed by Governor Bullock. Texas reporting reflects a similar situation. Since 2013, Texas has included information on born alive babies in its abortion reports, but in that time has reported 0 babies born alive. However, that may change in future reports. This year, Texas enacted a new law strengthening its protections by establishing a physician-patient relationship between the doctor performing the abortion and any surviving infant. Similar to the federal Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, Texas's new law provides methods of enforcement and it requires people aware of any violations to report them. The law went into effect on September 1st. However, still only 2/3 of the states have any laws to protect infants who survive abortions, and some states have been barred from establishing protections for these babies. In 2019, 14 states considered legislation to create or strengthen protections for infants who survive abortions. In only 5 states, bills were passed by the legislature, and just 2 were signed into law, in Texas and in Arkansas, which now requires doctors to report born-alive babies to the Arkansas Department of Health. In 3 states, the protections were vetoed by the governor. These states were Montana, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. Even when states have strong protections for babies who survive abortions, they are unable to extend these protections to residents who obtain abortions in other states. 7 states in the District of Columbia have no restrictions on how late in pregnancy babies may be aborted, yet none of these jurisdictions have established legal protections for born-alive infants. New Mexico is one of these. In 2017, almost a quarter of New Mexico abortions were performed on women from other states, and it is likely that some of these women traveled from states with protections for born-alive babies, such as Arizona. A baby who survives a late-term abortion in New Mexico has just as much of a right to medical treatment as a baby who survives an abortion in Arizona. Enacting the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act would ensure that federal law protects those babies equally. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Logmans, for your testimony, and I thank you all for your willingness to join us today and bring these stories to light. Unfortunately, abortion survivor Melissa Oden, hoped to join us today but could not. And before we begin, I move to include her written testimony and birth record for the record. And also it will be made available online. And I will also submit abortion survivor Jennifer Callender's testimony and birth record for the record. Objection? All right, in. We'll now provide all members present with the opportunity to question our witnesses. We have a significant and wonderful outpouring in number of members who are present. So I ask, implore, beg my colleagues that are present to be conscious of the time they use and limit their questions to the 3 minutes. I now yield to the gentleman from Louisiana, Republican Whip Steve Scalise.
I thank the chair, Chair Wagner. I will heed your request.
Don't make me use this.
Exactly. I really want to thank the four panelists. We have medical doctors, nurses. Your passionate testimony and just the powerful words that you spoke about what is really happening out there. You're on the front lines of defending life at its most fragile stage. As you see these things that are going on, babies being born alive, while others that oppose this legislation are trying to say it doesn't happen, it absolutely happens. And you confirm that and continue to help give us the tools we need to fight here in Congress. Let the record also reflect, there are regular committee rooms that are available right now that were denied to us by Speaker Pelosi. We were not allowed to use committee rooms that are available as we speak and empty. So we made up our own committee room. And I want to first thank my staff who worked so diligently on putting this together, Eric Schmitz and Marty Reiser especially, for helping allow this meeting to happen where we could at least give this testimony, even though the speaker wouldn't give us rooms that might be more fitting for it. This actually is, I think, a much more genuine setting because let it reflect, number one, we didn't have enough seats at the dais for members of Congress, so many members of Congress who are here to ask their questions, but also the overflowing crowd. It's an overflowing crowd, and I appreciate all of you who came here, traveled here to be a part of this hearing. For all the questions I might have, I truly appreciated the presentations that were given, and out of respect to my colleagues, I want to give them an opportunity as well to speak out, who have been so passionate at fighting for life and the Born Alive Act. And with that, I would yield back the balance of my time.
Good job. 1:11 on the clock, Mr. Whip. Thank you. I will now yield myself 3 minutes, of which I will not use for questioning entirely here. I do want to bring up, and thank you, Ms. Longbones, for talking about the data and information. I want to point out that H.R. 962, our Born Alive Survivors Protection Act, does require that every state report data. Not only are there criminal aspects of this for those that kill an unwanted child, and civil remedies for the mother if she should choose that, and most of all, providing life-saving protection and medical services for an unwanted child that is born alive. But it requires that every state and jurisdiction keep data and research and records. Abortion survivor Melissa Oden from Kansas City has published her story in a book entitled You Carried Me, A Daughter's Memoir. Melissa could not be here today, but she did testify before the House Judiciary Committee in June as a minority witness, and she reminded all legislators that we have sworn under the Constitution to provide equal protection to all our constituents, which includes babies like Melissa, no matter the circumstances of their birth. Melissa has founded the Abortion Survivors Network with hundreds of other Americans who were provided the miracle that has denied so very many infants. And her testimony is online, along with others, for the record, along with her birth certificate. I thank you, ladies, for your bravery, for your courage, for your testimony and testament here today. We stand on your shoulders, each and every one of us. So with that, I will yield back the balance of my time, and I now yield to the gentleman from New Jersey, the chairman of our pro-life caucus, Congressman Chris Smith.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to thank the four very powerful, articulate, accomplished women, compassionate, who have spoken today. I think your life stories, you know, Dr. Aldman, you were on the board of Planned Parenthood, and now you are with us. What a difference that makes, and I thank you for that. We all thank you for that. I have a question, but I hope we will all ask questions, and then maybe collectively you can take them and then answer them in the interest of time. But, you know, there's a cover-up. It's a profound cover-up. We've seen it with abortion over these many decades, 61 million dead babies, the equivalent of the number of children, men, women, and children living in Italy have been killed by abortion since '73. And yet we have this other issue where these born children are being killed with impunity. And then comfort and words of that kind used to cloak it into euphemisms. I mentioned the cover-up by the medical profession and Dr. Cates, his statement that it's just, you know, unless we step in, it's not going to happen, or state legislatures. But there's also a cover-up of the media. They have refused, and perhaps you might want to speak to it as you answer all of our questions, why the media has so completely, there were some journalists here today, but they have a story here of children. The human rights of children are being violated with death, and very little is being done except in Gosnell's case and a few others, but they're the outliers, not the rule. So if you could speak to that, especially Dr. Aldman, since you were on the side of Planned Parenthood, perhaps you could see, you know, how the media has missed this story by a mile and have engaged in cover-up. I yield back.
I think the problem is that the media, like the rest of us, have been so indoctrinated over the years by a feminist agenda that promoted abortion at all costs, and they just do not want to look at this issue, and they think that this bill is just one more encroachment on abortion, and it's absolutely not.
Great, thank you, and I appreciate the gentleman yielding back his time. We're going to do something a little unusual here before we go directly to members. I'm going to ask you all, starting with you, Mr. LaMalfa in California, to just introduce yourself and the district that you represent. That's all, and we'll move quickly around the table so that everybody knows that you were here. Please.
Thank you. Doug LaMalfa, 1st District of Northern California. Welcome, panelists. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Vicki Hartzler from Missouri's 4th Congressional District.
Hi, good afternoon. Ross Spano from Florida's 15th Congressional District.
Andy Harris from Maryland's 1st Congressional District.
Debbie Lesko, Arizona's 8th District.
Russ Fulcher from Idaho's 1st District.
Martha Raby from Alabama's 2nd District.
Phil Rowe, 1st Congressional District, obstetrician, gynecologist, pro-life.
Larry Bouchon, 8th District of Indiana, and I was a cardiovascular surgeon prior to coming to Congress.
Robert Adderholt, Alabama's 4th Congressional District.
Hi, I'm Jeff Fortenberry from Lincoln, Nebraska, which is the 1st Congressional District. Thank you for your courageous testimony.
G.T. Thompson from the Pennsylvania 15th Congressional District.
Jackie Walorski, Indiana 2nd District.
Mike Burgess, Texas 26th District, which is just north of the DFW airport.
Chris Collins, New York 27, that's the Buffalo area and the surrounding suburbs. Thank you for being here.
Roger Marshall, the big 1st District of Kansas.
Brad Winstrup, 2nd District, Ohio.
Doug Lamborn, 5th District of Colorado, Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Ralph Norman, South Carolina, 5th District.
Brian Babin, 36th District of Texas, which is Houston over to Louisiana. And thank you so very, very much for your testimony.
I'm Ron Estes from Wichita, Kansas, the Kansas 4th District.
I'm John Joyce from Pennsylvania 13. I just wanted to make you aware there, by my count, are at least 6 healthcare providers here as well today supporting you and thanking you for being present today.
Buddy Carter, the 1st Congressional District of Georgia.
Carol Miller, the 3rd District of West Virginia.
Michael Cloud, District 27 of Texas. Thank you for being here.
I thank my colleagues, and I thank those that have submitted questions for the record and that are with us in spirit, but not necessarily here with us today. But this is an incredible outpouring. So without further ado, the chair will now recognize the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Bularski, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, ladies, thank you so much. I can assure you of one thing today, that I think that not only will they hear us in this room and the places outside of this room where this message travels, but I think America will hear us today. I think the people of America are with us today. And I think we'll look back at this day and we'll say what started there was a revolution and the nation did what was right for the sake of right. So I can't thank you enough for being here. You know, we're here to defend the sanctity of life, speak out against a radical anti-life agenda that would legalize infanticide. While I have long fought to defend the unborn, I can't believe that we're in this room today and that we're talking about defending the rights of the unborn has boiled down to a partisan issue in this place, the people's house, the people of America. And we're talking today about a partisan issue on saving aborted babies. It's not only common sense that provides medical providers providing the same level of care to any baby, no matter how they're born, is simply what is right. But I'll tell you what, I, for one, came here today to say loud and clear that it is time for Speaker Pelosi to stop blocking protections for born alive babies. It's time to allow a vote on this vital bill. Ms. Stanek, if this bill had been enacted, how would the story of the little baby you found dying in the soiled utility closet have ended differently?
If the baby were a wanted baby, a team of 4 specialists would have been sent over from the NICU specifically to care for this little guy when he was born, assess him, and provide appropriate medical care. But because he wasn't wanted, the only people present at his delivery was a nurse coworker friend and an OBGYN resident. That's the difference.
I appreciate it. You know, you guys, the story of this heartbreaking baby is why my colleagues and I have repeatedly called for the House to vote on H.R. 962, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, a common sense bill to require that medical care be provided to children who survive a failed abortion. While my colleagues and I have asked for the bill to be taken up on the floor 80 times, we have requested 80 times for this bill to come down on the floor. Democratic leadership in the House has refused to allow an up or down vote. This should not be partisan. It's simply the right thing to do for the sake of right. We've got to stand together against this radical and inhumane agenda, and we must protect the rights of all infants. Thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
I thank the gentle lady for yielding back. Yes, 80 times and multiple amendments at the Rules Committee that have been not even made in order to be voted up and down on the House floor. You know, we had over 35 members here at the very beginning. I also want to thank Rachel Wagley from my staff and Molly Burke and Arthur Bryant, along with the WHIPS team, for doing all this. I want to make sure that I get that in because this has been a yeoman's job to put this all together, and I thank them without. And I appreciate that point of privilege. So without further ado, the chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Collins, for 3 minutes.
Thank you. And also want to just say thank you for all you've done, Jackie as well, and our whip and Chris Smith, in bringing this issue forward. As the only New Yorker here, I think I'd like to, or New York rep here, I'd like to point out that last year our Assembly and Senate passed, and our governor said he proudly signed into law what we now know as the Born Again Murder Bill in New York State. And to add insult to injury, they lit up the Empire State Building in pink to celebrate signing the Born Again Murder Bill. Now, I'm going to tell you something that is the absurdity in New York that you'll find hard to comprehend. 2 weeks later, they signed a bill that said it is unlawful to declaw your cat because that's inhumane. And they signed that into law in New York 2 weeks after signing the partial birth murder bill. Unbelievable as it is, I think it's important to bring that up. Now, Dr. Perucci, in this case, you know, we're talking about medical care for infants born alive or the denial of it currently today, certainly in states like New York and some others. Can you tell me, is there any other instance anywhere where a doctor who would have a relationship, if you will, with a patient would deny or not treat that individual?
The short answer is of course not. In this land, when you go to the hospital, the default ruling is you resuscitate someone, until you figure out if there's underlying pathology that says we should stop. We side on life at every other time of life. There is no other time when we say automatically we'll stop. We go to great lengths if someone has something called a DNR, a do not resuscitate. Those are the exceptions to the rule. Why we would ever assume a baby shouldn't be resuscitated is inconsistent with how we practice medicine at every other point in life.
Thank you for that. And real quickly, Ms. Stanek, the other side actually claims they're not supporting this bill because babies are never born alive after supporting an abortion. Now, to me, that's both disingenuous and just a blatant attempt for them to avoid this issue, just like Ann Wagner pointed out, we couldn't even get a hearing room today. They're trying to dodge this. But based on the experience that you've shared, how would you respond to that claim that this is not needed? I think I know the answer.
issues that are complicated that have genuine disagreement on, but this is one that seems should be so obvious and should have absolutely no disagreement, and there's no complicated issues to this. And so once again, I just request that this act be brought out of Judiciary Committee and submitted to the House floor. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Estes, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Wagner, and I don't want to thank Whip Scalise for organizing this hearing. I want to thank our panelists as well for being here today. You know, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection proud to be able to sign the discharge petition to force a vote on this. You know, as we talk about this, it's really important time in our country to have this debate. You know, when we're looking at states like New York or Virginia or Vermont or, you know, Illinois that are looking at changing their laws, moving to legalize late-term abortions and repeal whatever abortion protections there are, born alive protections there are. Furthermore, there's 24 states that don't have any protection for born alive infants, including and those laws, including the 2002, don't carry penalties for failing to care for a born alive baby. So clearly, we need this legislation. You know, with that, Ms. Longbonds, you know, in your testimony, you state that at least 160 born alive babies have been reported by 7 states. So unfortunately, neither we nor the Centers for Disease Control know how much larger that real number is if we looked at all 50 states. And shouldn't all states report this information? And how do you think the reliable reporting of the frequency of these born alive abortions will change the policy debate?
Thank you, Congressman. So yes, we have numbers from 7 states, Arizona, Indiana, Florida, Michigan, Minnesota, Oklahoma, and Texas. So Arizona has reported 10 babies in 2017 alone. Indiana reported 27 babies between 2008 and 2018. Florida reported 23 babies between 2013 and 2019. Michigan reported 84 babies between 1997 and 2018. Minnesota reported 16 babies between 2015 and 2018. And Oklahoma suppresses the exact number, and Texas started reporting in 2013, but as I mentioned earlier, has reported 0 babies so far. Sometimes when we debate this policy, we hear claims that this is all hypothetical, that these babies don't really survive abortions, but we know that they do, and reliable, accurate reporting from the states shows that these babies are very real, these born alive abortion survivors, and that they need to be protected.
Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for the work that you all do. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank all of you for being here, and thank you for what you are doing. This is certainly something that we are most grateful for, all of your efforts. Dr. Altman, I wanted to ask you, we know that H.R. 962 is needed to protect abortion survivors. And Deborah Edge, who was a former abortion clinic employee, wrote an op-ed about her experience and describing the doctor she worked with who was snipping the spines of babies delivered alive. Can you tell us more about her story? You know, I just can't tell you. I'm doing my best to keep my composure here, but just to hear this and just to try to imagine. And look, I'm a pharmacist. I'm a healthcare professional, and this is just. Can you just elaborate on this?
I can't elaborate too much because I'm not as familiar with her story, but basically she worked in a clinic very similar to Gosnell's, and that's what they did when the babies were born alive. They would go ahead and snip their spines. I think it's far more common to just let babies die, just move them to the soiled utility room. There was a, a, a question that was posed to a group of OBGYNs as to what do we do when a baby, is alive after an abortion? And the doctor that responded said, well, we just put them to the side and we take care of the mother and make sure everything's fine and that she's not bleeding. And by the time we finally get back around to looking at the baby, usually all vital signs are gone by then. Because if you leave these little tiny babies on a cold sink or in a cold basin with no oxygen and no protection, they're going to go down rapidly. The other thing I wanted to say earlier was something that this bill does that I don't know if you realize it or not. It protects people in the medical community, protects nurses, protects staffers, because they're not put in the position where they have to watch little babies die when they know it's wrong. And it gives them that protection to be able to, for the clinic managers to know that they're obligated by law to report. And I think that we don't really understand the impact that that's going to have on people.
Well, again, I want to thank each of you for what you're doing. We just cannot express to you how much we appreciate you being here and in the fight that you're fighting. Thank you. Now yield back.
The chair now recognizes a gentleman from Maryland, the co-chair of the Pro-Life Caucus, Mr. Harris, for 3 minutes. Now, okay. Back to my script. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman, for 3 minutes.
Thank each of you for being here. I hope you realize what Congressman Wagner and Steve Scalise said. We could not even get a room. We're in the basement. We could not even get a room that's vacant. We're under the basement to even have a hearing. So I hope that resonates with you. Dr. Altman, in reading your background, you served for Planned Parenthood in Jacksonville from 81 to 83. Dr. Peruski, you mentioned you used to be, I guess, pro-choice. What experiences changed your mind? Why did you flip? And just elaborate for everybody here.
Well, I was extremely pro-choice, pro-abortion. I felt it was a woman's right, probably because I'd had an abortion, and I think that affected my opinion. But I think I even did abortions when I was pregnant. But after I delivered my baby, when I went back, the fact that the baby was unwanted was no longer enough justification for me to kill it. I think it was making that baby fetus connection.
There was no single aha moment in that transformation, but it was actually particularly in caring for babies who weren't going to survive and watching their parents. They weren't grieving a blob of tissue. They were grieving a real person. And there have been a couple of circumstances over the years when the baby was clearly not going to live much longer and the parent couldn't be there. And I picked up that baby so that the baby wouldn't die without being the comfort of somebody's arms. Those were real people, and that absolutely had a huge impact.
Well, thank you for joining the fight. All of us here are wanting to do I think Dr. Rowe mentioned, what can we do to help win this fight, because it is a fight. I yield back.
I thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Dr. Bouchon, for 3 minutes.
Well, thank
started, I want to just read 2 responses that I've got from that post. Young lady by McCary says, "This is so stupid. Legal abortions are done in the first 6 to 8 weeks." A lady by the name of Heather responded, "This is not a thing. The fact that you think it is scary." We do need to raise that education. The fact that they think that I think that is scary. So I would just bring up one last thing. This whole thing called abortion is at the heart of an industry. This is a moneymaker for a lot of people. And I just wonder how many of these actions, how many of these tragedies are in that underbelly of that dark, dark industry. You don't need to answer this, of course, but I just want to bring that up. Could we be hiding the born alive notion? Could we be changing the reporting structure or ignoring certain reports because it's an industry that makes money for people? Again, I would open that up. We've got a few seconds left. If anyone would like to respond, I don't necessarily, I'm asking for that, but.
Wait, if my mic will work. I think the problem is that the only people that are reporting on this kind of thing are the Christian type broadcasting networks who people expect to be pro-life, and we're not hearing this stuff from the regular media. And I think the regular media has to start reporting it, because otherwise people don't believe it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from West Virginia, Mrs. Miller, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Whip Scalise, Congresswoman Wagner, and Congressman Smith, and thank you to all of you for being here today. As a mother, I have been privileged to feel life quicken in my womb. As a grandmother, I know the joy that grandchildren and children bring to families' lives. It is shocking to me that my colleagues across the aisle would even think of denying babies who are born alive after an abortion the right to live. We must ensure that our most littlest and most vulnerable Americans receive protection. Dr. Perucci, Emmeline Aubrey Randolph was born at 29 weeks and weighed 2 pounds and 10 ounces. She was featured in a Time magazine article a few years ago to illustrate how amazing the advances in medical technology over the past 50 years have enabled us to save more premature babies. According to the article, in 1960, the survival rate for infants weighing less than 3.3 pounds was 28%. In 2010, that number rose to 78%. What are some of the scientific advancements that you have noticed that have made a difference in the survival rates for your young patients?
There's 3 primary things that have dramatically changed, not just the survival, but surviving well. The first was surfactant, a medicine that can be given directly into the baby's lungs. There's 7 stages of embryologic lung development when babies are born very prematurely. They're in stage 4, 5, it's early. So the surfactant helps that when you re-expand the lungs, they don't literally tear apart. Your body makes this. When you're that immature, you don't have enough. So being able to give that was a massive change. The next thing, giving moms while they were pregnant and in danger of delivering prematurely, steroids, betamethasone, helped mature the lungs even more so that we didn't need as much medicine once the baby was born. These things, once again, have greatly impacted how well the babies are surviving. One of the most recent things that has helped is I now look at the requirement of a ventilator as kind of a necessary evil, My goal is if they need it, get it on and then off. And I'm talking about babies the size of your hand, 6 to 12 hours of life, breathing on something called CPAP, just big prongs in their nose. Because when we step back and don't do as much mechanized opening and closing of those lungs, they don't scar as badly. And so the baby's able to continue to heal better on their own. Once again, they do need support. It's dicey for a while, but sometimes less is more. And trying to define that fine line of what part of less and what part of more should we be giving at any time. And it's different with each individual. But those three things have dramatically changed our outcomes.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Adderholt, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks the panel for everyone being here. And Dr. Perucci, let me direct my question to you. But before I do get to the question, I would like to highlight a part of your testimony that you mentioned earlier. I think it bears repeating. And you quote, "Neither I nor the NICU team can always fix or heal the newborn little ones who come to us. But there's no such thing as a human being who is literally worth less than another. Even if there is a decision to not resuscitate due to severe prematurity or continual abnormality, this is never equivalent to do not care or an excuse to abandon either the baby or the mother. So care is the minimum I owe to both of them. So thank you for sharing that with us today, and I think it's, like I said, bears to be repeated. In your testimony, you state that your views in favor of abortion were changed by the medical, scientific reality of caring for premature babies for over 20 years. And let me just ask my question to you. When did those views actually start to change during those 20 years?
They started to change, like I say, early on as I watched parents were grieving or anxiously at the bedside over incredibly premature people. Like I say, it was never about someone who was a false human. They were real. And the other thing that is astonishing, at the edge of viability, they arrive with a personality. I love when there's twins because you can tell which one's been kicking the other one in utero and which one is kind of a mellow soul. They arrive that way, and I'll often ask the parents, especially when I've got one that is feisty, and I'll look at them and say, okay, which one is responsible for that? And they're kind of point to each other. So that personality is jaw-dropping. So that was part of my evolution, watching the babies recognize their parents. They lift up their little eyebrows, even when their eyes are kind of still glued shut. They recognize the voices they've been hearing in utero is absolutely comes with the program of who we are. We're supposed to know our parents. So all of those things dramatically affected me, as well as early on I had multiple miscarriages. After miscarriage, we now do enjoy 3 children of our own, but I was mourning real people. It wasn't just the loss of tissue. Those were real people that I wasn't going to get to care for.
One last thing before my time runs out. What would you want your fellow medical practitioners who are still not pro-life to consider?
Boy, I would love if there was a way for them to be a fly on the wall in the NICU and see these real people, to walk in and see what kind of care, and see how, not just, like I said, that we're saving them, look at how they're thriving. And I can't do it every time, but my goodness, and there's a team of people. But the stories of the survivors and the families is just humbling and jaw-dropping. Like I say, we didn't save a platypus. That's a person.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Perucci, for the humanity with which you testify. And at the age of 20 weeks, let me remind everyone that a baby not only feels pain, but knows the sound of its mother's voice. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Arizona, Ms. Lesko, for 3 minutes.
Thank you. And I want to thank you, Representative Wagner. This is the most important bill in Congress. If we can't protect babies that are born alive, we have a major problem in our nation. And so I have to tell you, Ms. Stanek, I was reading all of your testimonies on the plane as I flew in yesterday, and tears filled my eyes with your testimony of the different times when you have observed yourself babies that were born alive due to a failed abortion, and they were just left there to die. During testimony, I've been told on the Florida Born Alive bill, a Planned Parenthood lobbyist expressed support for leaving an abortion survivor on the table to die. And when I served in the Arizona State Senate, I was on the Health Committee, and there too, there was testimony from, I believe it was a pediatrician, who said, yeah, if the mom doesn't want the baby to live, they're just comforted. And I was appalled. I remember being appalled at that time that you just leave a person born alive just die. And so this bill that you have forward, Ms. Wagner, really gives legal protection to the baby, because it's a human being, to the baby, because why should we have the abortion doctor decide? So anyway, Ms. Longbonds, can you kind of explain how this works? And maybe you're not the right person to answer. What does the abortionist say to the mom to try to convince them to just let the baby die?
Well, I have not been a witness to those conversations, but I think one of the strengths of the bill that we're talking about today is that it would take that conversation out of the abortionist's hands and make it clear that a baby who survives an abortion is a person and needs to be provided with medical care that would be provided to any other baby. Like you said, we've heard from lobbyists for Planned Parenthood as Florida was considering their Born Alive bill, that this decision should be left between the physician and the woman. But we know it shouldn't be, because this is a baby, and the baby deserves the same care that the rest of us do.
Yeah, and Dr. Altman, what happens? And is the mother told that the baby has a chance to survive if medical attention is given to the baby?
I would dare say that most of the time the mother's not aware. That baby's very quickly whisked away, and I suspect that she doesn't get a chance. She doesn't even know. So
Terrible.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Ann Wagner, for your great leadership on this, your courage on that. Also, Mr. Smith from New Jersey, tireless on this. And for our panelists, the courage it takes for you to step forward in this is greatly appreciated. So I was reviewing some of the information about the potassium chloride, okay, and how that's used, and why. I'm looking at a website. First, potassium chloride could be used in fertilizer. It's been used to blow up buildings, or a form of it. It's used in lethal injections for death row inmates. And so now we parallel that with the unborn, as well as this compound digoxin. But you have to hear this, what I've looked at on this website, with the uses of KCl, potassium chloride, with the intention of preventing the attendant medical, ethical, and legal problems arising from the birth of live-born anomalous fetuses. We initiated a program offering fetal intracardiac potassium chloride injection as a measure in what they're doing. A lethal fetal injection was offered to patients who desired an abortion directly into the fetal cardiac chambers, followed by observation of fetal heart activity to ascertain cessation, cardiac arrest. So as we contemplate terms like comfort care or the unbelievable words of Governor Northam of Virginia, and outside of the context of abortion, and this is for Dr. Perucci or anybody else who wants to jump in as well, babies are supposed to be evaluated objectively had they run the gauntlet and made this alive. And so by expert medical personnel, and I appreciate Ms. Lesko's comments and questions on that too. So can we ascertain, is this going to be by the Planned Parenthood personnel who have a profit motive here? Or is the bill going to be sufficiently delivering outside opinions or third opinions that are not by a profit person, if the mother, as was mentioned, even allowed to know? Dr. Perucci, please.
Well, I like the comment that was made earlier, I believe by Dr. Altman, that said this empowers the nurses who are present at these deliveries, essentially, to do something, as opposed to, because now it's by law that, hey, this baby's alive. We need to do something.
So we get more unbiased opinion on this instead of somebody with a profit motive.
Correct. And because I work at the Regional Referral Center, we get calls to run what we call our transport unit. We go out to all the different places all over the unit. Wouldn't it be amazing if I got a call from a Planned Parenthood building, we have a baby born alive, please send your team.
And this bill will provide that objective opportunity.
Assuming anyone takes you up on it.
Yep. Thank you.
The gentleman from Kansas, Dr. Marshall, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On my way over this afternoon, I had a moment or two to myself as I walked over here and I was contemplating today's hearing, and I got to reflect on my career a little bit as an obstetrician, my wife as a neonatal intensive care nurse. And a big part of my training was how to deal with complications of pregnancy, cord prolapse and placental abruption and shoulder dystocias and extreme prematurity. And I walk into this hearing, we talk about infanticide. And that's a term, it's too soft. This is the murder of newborn babies. Okay, let's make that clear. This is murder of newborn babies. Ms. Longbonds, are there other cultures that allow for the murder of newborn babies that allow this same process? Other countries?
Well, we know that the U.S. is not alone in this. We're one of 7 countries that allows elective abortion after 20 weeks. And another of the 7, Canada, also has published statistics in the number of babies who are born alive during abortions. And in Canada, between 2013 and 2018, there were 766 babies who were born alive during late-term abortions. So we know we're not the only ones, and if it's happening there, it's surely happening here too.
Thank you. I mean, my guess as an obstetrician is that this is happening thousands of times in this country. If I could share another story from my residency days, within the first month of being an OBGYN resident, setting up on labor and delivery and getting that page overhead. It was back before we had cell phones. The operator said, we need an OB resident stat to the ER. So run down 3 stories of stairs, through the building, clear to the other side, and walk into an ER bay. And there before me was a young lady, obviously in shock. She had no pulse. Her blood pressure was probably 40 over something, and basically she was lying in her own blood. And you walk into the room, I know I've got seconds, maybe a minute to get the placenta out of her. I know that she was pregnant, it's about all I know. I need to get that placenta out to stop the bleeding. And I look beside us, and I said, what's going on here? Can someone tell me, so as I'm trying to remove the placenta, what I'm getting ready to get into? And I look beside us, and in the next room, there's another baby, probably 27 weeks along, and its arm is just hanging there. And the baby otherwise is doing well, it's in pain, and they said, well, this is a failed abortion. They reached up and grabbed this arm, pulled it through the cervix, dislocated the arm, and they said, oh my gosh, this baby is further along than we thought it would be. And we were able to save the mom's life. But what I want to talk to, I think this is Dr. Perucci's question, is guesstimating baby's gestational age over 20 weeks. Really, if a woman walks into my office, she's over 20 weeks, I've never met her before, I slap an ultrasound on her, I can be off 3 to 4 weeks very easily. Would you agree with that and edify us a bit?
Oh, absolutely. There's actually been studies to say that my eyes, we're really not very good at going to a delivery and guesstimating what is the age of that baby. I will tell parents, if you want me there, I will do everything I can. To ask me to come there and just kind of peruse, do I think we can do this? No. In fact, there's really good literature that says the degree of liveliness of the baby before I attempt to resuscitation tells you if the baby will survive. That's not true. If I get the lungs opened up and the heart going, the baby gets a lot more lively. So our eyesight is really quite limited. You're exactly right. And there's literature that supports that.
I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Dr. Wenstrup, for 3 minutes.
Thank you all very much. I'd like to share a couple of positives if I can while we're here. I'm an Army Reserve doctor, and recently Lieutenant General Nadja West, MD, retired from the military as the Surgeon General of the Army. And she's the first African-American woman to reach Lieutenant General. And at a retirement ceremony, she explained to people that she was the 12th of 12 adopted children and how she went from being an unintended consequence to where she is today. My wife and I adopted a daughter last year, and I can't imagine this girl not having a chance at life. And fortunately, neither could her birth mother. But another story that leads to a question is, I'll tell you the story. When Michelle Blair was pregnant, her unborn baby was diagnosed with spina bifida myelomeningocele, a condition which the spinal cord doesn't form properly, as you know. It can be life-threatening and cause paralysis. Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center performed an in utero corrective procedure that worked. And the baby was born 6 weeks later. And Michelle, the mother, reported her baby is developmentally right on track. And the New York Times described a similar situation as operating on the patient within the patient. And I think, Dr. Perucci, you would agree with that as I see you nodding. My question to you is, what sort of medical issues have been corrected in the womb, besides spina bifida, that we can talk about today and point to the fact that this is a living human being?
Spina bifida is probably the most successful. There are also a condition called twin-to-twin transfusion, where there are variations of laser surgery that are done to help separate. There can be too much blood flow, one twin donating too much to the other. So I know that technology is advanced. I am not as coherent on all of the different kinds of surgery that are happening and where they are in their trajectory from animal models being moved to human, but certainly people especially I love the anesthesia literature that recognizes, yep, that's a person and they need anesthesia and we need to pay attention to how the baby's doing. You're operating on two people at the same time.
Pointing out that they're pain capable, right? Yeah. Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding back, and the chair does want to inform members that they may not have noticed it just yet, but votes just have been called. Now we know this is first vote, so we've got a little bit of time. Can I ask members to please limit, because I've got like maybe 5 or 6 left, their questions for just a minute or so, a little more, so that we can try and get everybody in, and we'll also have the network stay and as long as possible. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamburn, for 3 minutes.
And thanks for having this hearing. And I first want to thank Jill Stanek, who, when I was in the legislature in Colorado, came and eloquently testified on a piece of legislation I'd introduced to protect the survivors of abortion. And I see Marilyn Musgrave in the audience. She and I were allies on many other pieces of pro-life legislation when we were together in the legislature. But to keep this going for the time purposes, Dr. Altman, I'd like to ask you a question. H.R. 962 is needed because abortion providers can't be trusted to provide appropriate care for the survivors. And in your written testimony, you remind us that the notorious abortion provider Kermit Gosnell was convicted of killing 3 babies born after surviving an abortion. But were these the only cases that he was involved in like that? Can you remind us what the grand jury came up with?
Yeah, no, there were hundreds, but because they destroyed records and because of the statute of limitations on murder, there were only 3 that they could try him on, but they knew that there were many, many more. And there are other providers who had clinics very similar to Gosnell that have never been prosecuted, or they've been prosecuted and it hasn't gone anywhere. And it's really shameful that we have allowed this kind of cover-up for this kind of medical care. This is not medical care.
Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Spano, for just a brief minute.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all again for being here. I'll echo what's been said previously. I think what we do, what we say, what we tolerate, what we prioritize, what we permit says a great deal about who we are as a people. It says a lot about who we are as a nation, as a civilization. In many respects, we live in a society now that celebrates abortion, celebrates. I think that a day will come, I hope it's not in the too distant future, but where we will look back collectively in horror at what we have permitted to happen on our watch. I have a question for Ms. Stanek. Is there enough anecdotal and formally collected data to tell us that babies are born alive in late-term abortions and that then are either left to die or even murdered? We heard a lot about earlier gestational situations, but how about the late-term scenario?
Yep, please, real quickly if you've got something.
I just have, as far as anecdotal evidence goes, my experience at Christ Hospital. And at Christ Hospital, if members from the other side don't want to listen to me, Christ Hospital admitted to the Chicago Sun-Times, and I've had that entered into my record today, that between 10 and 20% of babies survived their abortions. So 1 in 5 is no small number. And I suspect they were, by my experience, under-evaluating. So it happens. Yeah.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Hearn, for a brief minute.
Thank you. Dr. Altman, in your written testimony, you pointed out that the 2002 Federal Born Alive Infant Protection Act reaffirmed that a baby is a person once he or she is born. But that does not prevent a physician from passively allowing an infant to die. From your experiences, and this is something that's really passionate to me, I had a sister that died of spina bifida 2 hours after birth in my mom's arms. I have a sister that's was 50 years old this year who was born with spina bifida, who's lived a good life. And her daughter, her oldest daughter, has been in a wheelchair her entire life with spina bifida. Each one of these pregnancies, my mom and my sister, each knew what their child was going to be like and has chose to. So this is a very passionate topic for me. The question I have for you is, from your experiences, what may be the motivations for an abortionist to let a baby die after a failed abortion?
I think the biggest thing is liability. They've got a lot of liability. The baby's usually born prematurely, may be injured, have a dangling arm. And so the baby can sue them when they become of age. The parent can sue them for a wrongful life. It brings outside authorities in looking at what they're doing. So they have everything to lose if the baby survives.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry.
Thank you, Congresswoman Wagner, for conducting this hearing. Something has left what I hope is an indelible mark on my heart today, and I think you said it, Dr. Perucci, that wantedness does not define humanness. And if you think about where we are sociologically, we have applied that principle across multiple spectrums of difficulties. When you see a homeless person on the sidewalk, you wonder what has happened to them and what can be done. For decades now, we've celebrated Special Olympics. When there is a wounded veteran whose wounds are so grotesque, we do not discard that person. We invest in their recovery and care. Wantedness does not define humanness. And I think this has to be the transformative moment for our society if we are going to tackle this reasonably and responsibly, with sound science and with compassion and ethics. So thank you for your testimony today.
I thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Gianforte, for just a red-hot minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was a proud signer, and I want to thank the panelists for being here, for your courage in coming forward on this issue that is just tragic in America. I was proud to sign the discharge petition for the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, and I've stood on the floor with many of my colleagues to ask for a vote, now 80 times. Our Constitution guarantees life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But without life, liberty and happiness are not possible. And that guarantee that's there in the Constitution exists not just for us, but it exists for unborn Americans and those that happen to survive an abortion. So thank you for bringing light to this issue. Dr. Perucci, we've heard today that this bill would require the same care is provided to a born alive after an abortion that would be provided to any other born at the same gestational period. Can you give some quick examples of what standard care looks like for children born prematurely?
The quick answer is, it is, depending on the age that they are born, there is always someone to assess what their needs are. And it's an individual tailored, but the similarity between everyone is equipped with an neonatal resuscitation program. You are given that as a baseline to be able to, quote, appropriately assess what are the needs and get either the right equipment, the right personnel, the right medical help to that baby.
And all we're doing here is trying to make those same services available to the survivors of abortion.
Yes.
Thank you for your testimony. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Riggleman, for just a second.
Oh, my goodness, it's over. No, thank you for being here. As you know, I'm from the Commonwealth of Virginia. I want to thank all of you all. We all have personal stories. But very quickly, we had a delegate introduce a bill, Kathy Tran, which I think you're aware of, where it would allow more abortions up until the moment of birth. We had an incredible delegate, Todd Gilbert, ask her all the way up until the moment of dilation, and she said yes. We also had a governor make a pretty bad statement when it comes to kids, actually horrific, about resuscitating them or making them comfortable until if they were to be resuscitated or not. It also seems like in Florida, and this is for Ms. Longbonds, and look, I'm a little quicker than other people, but this is such a dear subject to me, being from Virginia, but also what happened in my own family. It looked like a Planned Parenthood issued a statement after they had the same debate about allowing a baby to die on the table, that it would be a set of extremely unlikely and highly unusual medical circumstances where that baby would die. When the bill was passed, I'm a data guy. Has data indicated about the number of born alive survivors in Florida or anywhere else? And is their statement accurate, Planned Parenthood's, on that specific statistic about children?
So yes, so Planned Parenthood, like you said, claimed that it was hypothetical and highly unusual that a baby would survive an abortion. But after the Born Alive bill was passed in Florida in 2013, there have been 23 babies who have been reported to have survived abortions. So not as unusual or hypothetical as they claimed.
And thank you. You guys are heroes, and I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riggleman. And what can I say? Thank you from the bottom of my heart. This concludes our business for this minute. The very next minute, we need everyone across this country to demand that House leadership bring H.R. 962, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, to the floor, as we did in the 115th Congress, to reaffirm life. I live for the day when abortion is not just illegal, but it's unthinkable. And what is happening to these babies that are born because they're not wanted is unconscionable in this country and anywhere. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart. We're adjourned.